All right, welcome to Question of Strength. This is my first attempt at a podcast. The format will be completely informal. It's just me basically delivering you information from my home gym. I will give you information about a topic that really interests me right now, and then field some questions. Now, the questions can either be sent directly in the chat room, can be also questions that have been sent to me either by via my T Nation forum, by Instagram, by email, or in the comment section of this presentation in the future. My goal is obviously to answer questions that are the most interesting to you. So the more you participate, the more you share, the more you ask questions, the less boring it becomes. All right, let's get started. So the first topic I want to cover is this big thing. And to me, it's always funny because it's actually something that's been going on for more than 40 years in the field of training, the combat or the war between volume and intensity, as if you only have to pick one or two or the other. Like what you see on social media right now is you have people claiming that volume or gradually increasing volume or performing a fairly high amount of work is the key to building muscle growth. Then you have the camp that state that it's the level of effort, going to failure, proximity to failure, and so on and so forth, even going beyond failure, that is the real key. And obviously both ideas are pretty much mutually exclusive, because it's kind of hard to train all out on your sets, going to complete failure, and do many of these sets, especially if you want a high quality of work, right? So for example, this morning on my first movement, I did machine chest press, and I used an intensification technique, which took me to failure. If I were to repeat a second effort right after that, the second set, there is no way the quality would have been there. So in a sense, those two ideas kind of look to be mutually exclusive. Now, the thing is that both camps, the higher volume camp, which normally leaves several reps in reserve to allow you to do the volume, because if you push your sets to your limit, then, as I just mentioned, there's just no way to do a high number of effective sets, right? And the camp that you say, well, you need to push your sets to failure so you don't do a lot of volume, they both have champions. You have, for example, a guy like Mike Israetel, who's very accomplished both for his own physique as well as from an all knowledge education perspective, very smart. Then you have the other end of the spectrum with guys like Paul Carter, who advocate like the good old high intensity training method of doing one set all out to failure on an exercise and very limiting your sets per body part for something like 3 to 4, 5 sets per week for a muscle. The thing is that if you look at people training both ways, well, you have people who have success stories training either one of these methods. You have guys who are doing volume with very high level of success. You have people doing low volume and very high effort, having lots of success. And if you look at the pro bodybuilding circuit, you have examples of both. You have, for the low volume guys, you obviously have Dorian Yates. You have right now Anto Labrada. You have several others that are more on the lower volume side. Dog crap training, DC training, is a very popular method that actually had produced lots of results. Fortitude training by Scott Stevenson, also on the lower end of volume. But then again, you have guys like Jay Cutler, you have guys like Lee Priest, and many other champions who accomplish their physique by using high volume. So it can be confusing. But you know what? The worst thing is, because what makes you money is being polarizing. Not only do they provide information regarding their own philosophy, their own belief, they make it adamant to basically completely destroy the other guy's methods, claiming that there's no way it can work, and it's only because they're taking drugs or genetics or what, so on and so forth. And then you basically have to pick your camp. And because if you are more of the middle ground, the more logical and the more analytical, okay, this might work, you're not just, it's not very popular for marketing purposes. All right. So the thing is that both methods can actually work. And it really depends on what drives you. There are two different stimuli, so they can actually be alternated. You don't have to be married to an approach, okay? Just because your favorite influencer uses that method, you're not cheating on him if you try something different. Now, the reason why both can work is because of the principle of effective reps. Now, I've covered this in the past, but I want to talk about it briefly again before we get on to the questions. Okay, an effective reps is basically essentially a repetition in your set that has all the condition to create maximum growth or stimulate maximum hypertrophy. And you have obviously several conditions required to do that. First of all, you need to recruit a high amount of fast twitch fibers because they are the most growth prone. They have the most potential to build size, strength, power, and so on and so forth. So obviously someone who is born with more fast twitch fibers is likely going to be able to build more muscle. But even then, when you're training, what you want is 2 sets that will bring in as many of those fast twitch fibers as possible in your set. There are several ways of doing that. Either you lift heavy weights. Once the load you have to lift represent more than 80% of your maximum at that moment, you will recruit most of your fast twitch fibers. So that can be either be done by using 80% or more on the bar. In that case, from rep number 1, it's an effective rep, and so all the reps in your sets are effective, or by accumulating fatigue. On each rep, okay, with the rep ranges that we use, so between 3 and 12 reps, we normally have a decrease in strength due to fatigue of 3% per rep. So each rep, you're 3% weaker. But because the load doesn't change, the relative load increases. So for example, if you have 70% of your maximum on the bar, on that first rep, it does represent 70% because you have no fatigue. By the second rep, you have created an inroad of 3%. Now you're 3% weaker, so the relative load is no longer 70. It's 73% compared to what you can do at that moment. By the rep number 3, it's 76%. Rep number 4, it's 79%. Rep number 5, 82%. From that point on, all the reps from that point on afterwards will recruit the fast twitch fibers, which is condition number 1. Okay, so you do need to reach a certain level of fatigue in your set if you're not using heavy weights. Okay, so that's the first condition. Now you're going to ask, well, Christian, if I'm doing explosive work, well, right from the start, I'm recruiting the fast twitch fibers. Does that mean that it's good for hypertrophy? No, it's not, because there's a second condition that is required for a repetition to be effective for growth, and that is a high amount of muscular tension. You need tension on those muscle fibers. Okay, there's a pull that they have to resist, producing force. They're trying to contract, while the load is trying to lengthen you. That creates tension in the muscle. The more tension there is, the more that the fiber that is under tension, will be stimulated to grow. So first you bring in the fibers, then you must impose a high level of tension on the recruited fibers. And that is dependent on the level of effort you put in your reps. Basically, if you're capable of moving the weight fast, and you are moving fast, tension is low because you're using acceleration momentum to lift the weight. So from a muscular perspective, the bridges between the actin and myosin don't stay connected for long, and the intramuscular tension decreases. So the important thing to remember is if the movement is fast, tension goes down, and tension needs to go up to stimulate growth. Does that mean you should lift slowly on purpose? No, because if I lift slowly on purpose, I'm reducing force production, reducing muscle fiber recruitment. It's not better. What you want is you want to do your reps so that even though you are trying to lift the weight fairly fast, it's just not moving fast anymore. There's a drop in speed. So there will be a point in your set where you notice, you know what, oh, this is getting harder and harder, and it's moving slower and slower and slower. If you have an accelerometer, like a device you can attach to the weight and measure the barbell speed, you can actually see a drastic drop in barbell speed after a certain number of reps. This is when the set starts to count. Okay, reps from that point on will be effective for growth. Now, if you go to muscle failure on your set, okay, you do as many reps as you can, and you just know where you can complete one more rep, going to failure, regardless of the total number of reps you did in your set, you're going to have 5 or 6 of those reps that will be effective for growth if you go to failure. If you do 30 reps and you go to failure, it's going to be 5 or 6 effective reps. If I'm doing 6 reps to failure, it's going to be 5 to 6 effective reps. Okay, so as long as the effort level is the same, you're going to get the same number of effective repetitions. Now, the goal to stimulate growth, okay, it is volume dependent. Volume is important for hypertrophy, less important for strength. but very important for hypertrophy. But it's not the total volume of reps you're doing in your or sets you're doing in your workout. It's the volume of those effective reps. So if I'm stopping every one of my sets 4 reps short of failure, okay, which is actually where most people are stopping their set. They might think they have 1 or 2 in reserve. In reality, they're much closer to 4, sometimes 5. So if we go from the point that in a set, if you go to failure, you have 5 repetitions that are effective, and you're stopping 4 reps before failure, that means how many reps are effective in your set? Only 1. That takes a bunch of sets to try to get the same stimulus. So even you might do 20 sets in your workout, which is a high volume of work, but the volume of effective reps is just not that high. If I do 5 sets to failure, I'm going to get more effective reps than 20 sets with the 4 reps in reserve. See what I mean? So volume is important, but it's not garbage volume that does not contribute to hypertrophy. Okay. So now to get back to our original topic, that volume work and intensity, low volume work can be effective. It's all about the number of effective reps you get in the workout. Now you, again, depending on who you're listening to, you probably need between 15 to 30 of those effective reps to get maximum growth stimulation. Okay, so if I'm going to failure on my sets, I can require as little as 3 work sets for a muscle to get a good amount of growth, and I can go up to 6 of those sets per muscle. That would give me 30 reps, 30 effective reps, which is around 3 to 6 work set if I go to failure. Doing more than that, going to failure, is probably not going to lead to more growth. It will lead to more fatigue, more central fatigue, lengthen the recovery period, create more muscle damage, and so on and so forth, but it will not give you more growth. Now, if I'm doing, let's say I'm keeping 2 reps in reserve, then that gives me, let's say, 3 reps per set. Then I would need probably like 10 sets, 10 work sets to get the most hypertrophy for that muscle versus 5 sets for going to failure. And if I keep 3 reps in reserve, I might need 15 sets. You see what I'm doing with this, right? So as long as you accumulate enough of those effective reps, it will work. Now, the downside is if you need to do a lot of garbage volume to get there, well, it might be harder to recover from because of the cortisol elevation, because of the energy you're using. So and just it's time consuming, right? But it still works, okay? If you love the pump, if you're someone who crave that pumped up feeling, that congested feeling, that might be something that is worth looking into because it will motivate you more. Now, the downside of the lower volume, higher effort level is that, well, going to failure can be a lot more draining on the nervous system. So certainly you cannot have the same amount of frequency when training, even if the volume is regulated downward. It's also mentally tough to sustain that level of effort day in and day out. Furthermore, it might work quickly, but what do you have when you can no longer progress? Because you do need to increase the training stimulus. With volume, you can always keep less reps in reserve. For going from 3 reps in reserve to 2 to 1 for certain weeks, that might be doable. You can increase the sets, that might be doable. When you're shooting for that lower volume work, you can't really go by decreasing reps in reserve because you're already going to failure. You cannot add volume because more volume to failure is just not doable. So the only thing you have to be able to progress is adding weight to the bar, progressive overload, adding reps to your sets, and maybe using more demanding training methods, which, for example, you can go to failure, like 1 rep short of failure on week 1, to failure on week 2, failure plus drop set on week 3, failure plus rest pause on week 4, and so on and so forth. I'm using a 1 week period, but you could stick for 3 weeks for each. But certainly it limits the option when it comes to progression. And going to failure also limits your exercise selection because I don't really like recommending a failure on big compound movements with free weights. I believe that technique will break down before you hit muscular failure, so you need to use machines. But regardless of all of that, they can both work, provided that you train hard, fairly hard. If you the big problem I see nowadays is that people get married to a way of training and they completely disregard the element that is not the driving force of their program. For example, if your driving force in your mind is volume, your mind is only thinking volume, 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 and you are subconsciously probably like leaving more and more and more and more reps in the tank as the time goes by because you don't pay attention to that. And it's very easy to go from leaving 2 reps in reserve, which is fine, to leaving 3 and 4 and 5. Okay, and you might actually bargain subconsciously. I'm going to train little bit less hard to be able to do more volume, more volume. But soon you might train at such a low level of effort on your sets just to be able to do volume that your sets basically don't trigger any growth. So you might do a bunch of them, you're burning calories, that's fine, but you're not stimulating growth. On the intensity effort, well, you know what? You might actually benefit from adding a little bit of volume. Okay, you don't have to be. You need to do only 5 sets, otherwise I'm overtraining. You can try. You know what? Try 6, try 7. You might be surprised that they might actually be effective. Okay, so me, I like to use both tools depending on the phase I'm in. You can either use a phase, let's say 4 to 6 weeks of gradually increasing volume, and you can do 4 or 6 weeks of more low volume, high effort. You could even, God forbid, use both approaches simultaneously. So, for example, me personally, okay, because I don't, probably neurological factor, muscle biases, it's very hard for me to get a good contraction, good tension on my lats. I'm super trap dominant, short arm, so hitting my lats is really hard. So if I'm using the low volume to failure approach, I just don't get the stimulus I need. I will have compensation, even though I'm trying not to. And so in that case, when it comes to back, me, okay, it's not Tibbs said that you need to do higher volume for back and lower volume for chest. No, for me, I respond very well to intensity, low volume for pectorals, but I need more volume for my lats, for example. So it's perfectly fine for, let's say, the chest and biceps workout to be more on the intensity end of the spectrum, and then your back workout would be more on the volume end of the spectrum. I mean, who says you can't do that? What are the rules? Okay, you don't get married to one method. So just like little publicity stunt here. I'm developing a new line of product training programs for T Nation, and one will be it's all hypertrophy program. The first one will be like an intensity based program, so it's a 6 weeks progression based on gradually increasing the level of effort with a low volume of work. Then there's going to be a volume progression program. There's going to be a load progression model, because it's basically the 3 ways to develop hypertrophy. You can focus more on effort, you can focus more on volume, you can focus more on load. Okay, so load-based progression. And then it will be a 4th program, which will be a hybrid of all of that. So okay, the way I do it is I like to alternate between, let's say I start with one phase of low volume, high effort, because I think that learning to push hard, learning to train to failure is a valuable tool, because once you know what failure feels like, you also know how 1 rep short of failure feels like, 2 reps short of failure feels like. So when you move on to the volume block, it's much easier to provide the right level of effort and not go too low on the effort level, making your set completely like a waste. Okay. Anyways, I like to do that, and then you're gonna have a low-based approach at the end. Can't wait to enter a bulk while doing 2 sets, stop, set, back, off, set, 6 set. Yeah, actually, that's what I'm doing right now. So what you say is that I can't wait to re-enter a bulk. Well, I don't really like the term bulk. Again, words have power. Okay, and I know that everybody uses bulking. It's just a practical word to use because people know what it's about. To me, it just conjures up like I'm gonna eat whatever I can, like everything inside, just to put on as much weight as possible, hoping to build more muscle. I prefer to use muscle growth phase because you should focus on that more. But definitely you should eat a surplus if you want to build more maximum muscle. Anyway, while doing 2 sets, so 1 top set, 1 back off set, 5 or 6 exercises 4 times a week. Yeah, that's pretty much what I'm doing. It's exactly what I'm doing right now. So what I'm doing at the moment is I'm training 4, sometimes 5 days a week. It depends on the week I'm in, depending on my schedule, depending on my energy level. I do 2 muscles per day. So for example, today was chest and triceps. And I tend to do 2 or 3 exercises per muscle. I do typically 4 to 5 sets. I do like 2 or 3 warm-ups depending on the movement, then one very hard set, which I'm adding an intensifier every week. So every week the set is more demanding, and then I do a back off set. That's what I'm doing right now. That's going to last for about 6 weeks. Then I'm going to switch more toward a volume-based approach. In fact, I already started doing that. I've been on this program for 5 weeks. So what I'm doing is, let's say for chest, I have 3 exercises. The first one will use a lower volume. The second exercise would be again low volume, and then the third one, which is more of an isolated movement, it's going to use more of a higher volume, lower effort level method, but it's still like 1 rep in reserve, not like 5. All right, so let's look at some questions. And you mentioned that intensity is your jam, and you know what? That's super important, because again, you can get results with very different methods, but ultimately, personal preference matters. Because what drives you, what motivates you, is likely going to help you train harder. So if you're someone who doesn't like to spend 2 hours in the gym or do 20 sets per muscle, because let's say you have a heart, you like to leave nothing behind in your set, then volume is just going to be effective for you. You're not going to get what you want out of that. And I find that the older I get, the less I can do well with volume. So even when I'm in my volume phase, it's still a moderate volume compared to what I was doing earlier. Partly because my neurological efficiency is better, so my set becomes effective more quickly. All right, some questions. So first question is bulking, here's that word again, necessary for our gainers? Okay, well, first let's look at, should you eat a lot more if you want to grow muscle? Do you need a surplus? And more so, do you need a significant surplus? And the answer is, like always, it depends. For most people, the answer will be yes. Okay, the reason is that food itself is anabolic. Okay, not just because it provides protein to build muscle and energy to drive your workouts, but because when you are eating, okay, especially carbs and protein, you do have hormonal and enzymatic changes in your body that helps you build more muscle. So for example, you're going to have the release of insulin, which has a bad rap, but it's one of the most anabolic hormone and anti-catabolic hormone in the body. You're going to have an increase in IGF-1, which is even more anabolic than insulin. You're going to have an increase in MTor activation. MTor is an enzyme that will potentiate or trigger increased protein synthesis, which can help you build more muscle, and so on and so forth. And it will decrease cortisol, especially if you had carbs in your meal. Carbs are the best anti-cortisol supplement you can find. So yeah, in a way, the more food you put in your mouth, the more of you there will be, because you need matter to build matter, but more importantly, you also have all these hormonal changes that make your body more anabolic. Now, the reason why I mentioned that it depends is that some people are more gifted naturally when it comes to the anabolic processes. Some people are born with a high, or not just born, but through lifestyle or whatever, or age, they have a higher natural level of testosterone, maybe a higher level of IGF-1, especially when you're younger and you have a healthy liver. You might have more insulin sensitivity, so you respond more positively to the effect of insulin as far as muscle is concerned. You might even produce more growth hormone, for example. So if you are that person, or you might have lower myostatin expression, all of that makes it much easier for you to build muscle. So if you are genetically gifted to build muscle, you don't need to use food as an anabolic as much, okay? Even if you don't get the maximum anabolic response from the food intake, your body is still at an advantage when it comes to building muscle. So people who are like that, or people who are on anabolic drugs, like steroids, growth hormone, so on and so forth, their physiology does not require to use food as a main anabolic. So these people can actually build muscle without a large surplus. They still build more muscle if they're in a surplus, but they can still build more muscle being at maintenance, for example, as someone who's not anabolic gifted, even if they're on a slight surplus. Okay. Now, the less advantage you are from an anabolic perspective, So you can have more slow twitch fiber. You can have lower mTOR activation, which at the muscle site is typically related to fast twitch fibers ratio. So the more fast twitch fibers you have, typically when you're training, you respond with a higher mTOR response. So it's easier to build muscle. If you have higher testosterone level, a lower testosterone level, lower insulin sensitivity, lower IGF-1, which normally comes as you get older, lower GH, which also comes down as you're getting older. So maybe then, yes, you need more food to make your body more anabolic, to compensate for the lack of natural anabolism, which kind of sucks because, well, you know what? That type of physique is more likely also to store fat. But if you want to build muscle and you're not genetically gifted or pharmaceutically enhanced, yeah, you do need a surplus. Maybe not a huge surplus, but certainly the less gifted you are, the more of a surplus you need, mostly in the form of protein and carbs to get those anabolic responses. Okay, so that was the first question. I have a few more on tap. Again, you can always post questions in the chat room. Don't be shy. We have plenty of people today, so there might be some good questions. Second one, what's your favorite lifting method for fat loss besides 6, 12, 25, GBC, and drop set? Okay, I don't know where. Okay, first I'm going to explain what those methods are. I don't know why you are mentioning them because I'm pretty sure I never really mentioned them as good fat loss methods. Okay, the reason is I don't like to use lifting mostly as a fat loss tool. Okay, I'm not saying that lifting does not help you get leaner. It does, but programming specifically to increase fat loss via lifting is likely going to make the lifting portion less effective for what it should be doing when you're dieting down, which is maintain your muscle mass and even increase muscle mass. Okay, so the 6, 12, 25 method is something that Charles Poliquin came up with, although it's actually a variant of a method invented by Fred Hatfield, which was a 6, 12, 40 method. So it's very similar. So basically, it's a triple set of 3 exercises. The first for the same muscle group. The first one you go heavy with 6 reps. The second one you go moderate weight for 12 reps, and the third exercise you go light for 25 reps. So it could be, for example, dumbbell bench press for 6 reps. And it could be machine chest press for 12 reps, and then cable crossover or pec deck machine for 25 reps. The original idea was not to use it as a fat loss tool. It was to hit all the muscle fibers. The logic was back then, well, the sets of 6 will recruit the fast twitch fibers, sets of 12 will target on the intermediate, and the 25 will focus more on the slow twitch fibers as well as capillarization. When we understand how muscle fiber recruitment works, that makes I wouldn't say it makes zero sense, but you don't need all of that to get to the fast twitch fibers and the intermediate anyway. So the main benefit, if you look at the current science, would be that the sets of 6 and to some extent 12 reps are good at creating mechanical tension on those fast twitch fibers, promoting growth, and the sets of 25 would increase local growth factors. The lactate production, so what people call lactic acid, but lactate, stimulate the release of growth factors inside the muscle, like mechanical growth factors that will directly stimulate anabolism in those muscles. So it's more so that the main driver of hypertrophy is the muscle tension on the fast twitch fibers or whatever fiber there is. The growth factors are kind of like the fertilizer for a plant. Okay, by itself, if you just put a plant in a bowl of fertilizer, it won't make the plant grow. But if you add fertilizer to the soil and sun and water, then it will grow faster. So adding those metabolic factor training after mechanical tension could potentiate hypertrophy. So I could see that. However, the amount of overall fatigue and stress from that superset basically makes it impossible to do a lot of quality work after that. So the end result is you're probably not going to grow more from that method than just doing regular sets. Anyway, the reason why I don't, and GBC, German Body Composition Training, was invented by Charles. Again, that's basically a superset of an upper body exercise and lower body exercise to promote maximum, which is itself a variant of peripheral heart action training by Bob Gajda, which was the first type of circuit training. The logic is that when you're training muscle groups that are far apart, your cardiovascular system must work harder because the body can actually decide where it sends blood. So you will send more blood toward the working muscle, reducing blood flow to the other parts. For example, when I train legs, my upper body feels flat because there's less blood flow going up there. Anyway, so the logic of the GBC was I'm doing an upper body lift and a lower body lift. So the heart and more importantly, the vascular system must work harder to shuttle blood from here to here, and that will have a higher metabolic effect. Maybe, but in reality, it just is a recipe for low quality of work because you just drain yourself. Anyway, my personal belief is that you should not use lifting as a main fat loss tool. That would mean doing lots of volume, very short rest periods, and probably reducing the load. All of that will reduce the actual growth stimulus. You want to use lifting to promote muscle growth or at least maintain the muscle you have while you're in a caloric deficit. And to me, that means training the same way as you would when you were trying to build muscle, maybe even lowering the volume. Think about it. If you are in a fat loss phase, you are in a caloric restriction. You are thus ingesting less calories, less nutrients. Okay. Remember what I said earlier. It's not just about the protein and the energy. It's about the hormonal and enzymatic responses from the food intake. The less food you ingest, the less anabolic you are. So if I'm reducing calories in a fat loss phase, what happens is your body is less anabolic. Less anabolic means you cannot recover as well from your training. So doing more training while your capacity to recover from training is lower is not a really good idea. Okay, in my opinion, the main reason why people lose muscle when they're dieting down, and understand we're talking about natural lifters here, steroids completely change the profile. The main reason why people lose muscle when dieting down is not so much the caloric restriction itself, is the fact that they are so scared of losing muscle that they dramatically increase their lifting volume, causing lots of muscle damage, increasing cortisol dramatically. Both will favor losing muscle over time. Okay, so I don't like to use lifting methods as a way to stimulate fat loss, but it will. To me, the main effect is that the more muscle you have, the more insulin sensitivity you have, for two reasons. First, you're going to have more insulin receptors if the muscle is bigger. Second, a bigger muscle is a bigger reserve to store more carbohydrates. So the body will always look to fill the liver and muscle glycogen stores before converting carbohydrates to fat. Okay, so the more muscle you have, the more carbs you can eat without storing fat, because you will store them in the muscles first, right? And remember what I said, the more you can eat, the more anabolic you are. So if you can get away with eating more carbs without storing fat, you are also increasing those anabolic hormones more, increasing the likelihood of maintaining your muscle while you're dieting down. All right. When doing a specialization program for two body parts, which is something I like to use often, so for 4 to 6 weeks, should I follow that by 1 or 2 weeks of easy training to avoid interfering with circumcompensation? Okay, lots of things going on here. First, let's address that circumcompensation thing. Circumcompensation when it comes to muscle growth is not a thing. Okay, you cannot surcompensate protein synthesis. You cannot surcompensate muscle growth. Okay, you can only, from a lifting perspective, surcompensate glycogen storage, which can happen if you deplete muscle glycogen either through carbs restriction or a volume increase. So that would, in both cases, reduces glycogen stores. If those glycogen stores in your muscle become low enough, your body will upregulate its capacity to store carbs in a muscle. Okay, so that's the only type of circumcompensation that can actually occur in lifting. You cannot surcompensate muscle growth. What happens is, after a stimulus is applied on a muscle, training session, protein synthesis, taking the protein you're ingesting and building muscle from it, is increased by for 30 to 36 hours. Okay. After the 36-hour period, protein synthesis inside the trained muscle becomes normal again. So in balance with protein breakdown. So after that point, it's kind of hard to add new tissue. Okay. So most of the growth for muscle will occur in that 36 hours period. And even more so in the first 24 hours, because at 36 hours, it's fairly low. Anyway, so let's say that you're doing a specialization program, getting a muscle 3 days a week. So Monday, Wednesday, Fridays, your specialization days. You do, let's say, for example, chest and triceps, for example. And the rest of the day, that's on Tuesday and Friday, Tuesday and Saturday, for example, you would do the rest of the body. Okay, the first thing is, and I want to mention that, and I will get back to that later, is that when you increase the training volume or the amount of work you're doing, on a weekly basis for one or two muscle, you must reduce volume elsewhere, okay, or training stress elsewhere. I like to say that when you put something in your program, you also must put something out or take something out. You cannot just keep adding stuff. That's the easy part. Instinctively, we think, I want more bicep, and I'm just gonna add more biceps work to my workout. Yeah, but the problem is that will lead to an increase in overall systemic stress that might actually become too much to optimally recover from and limit your gains. So just to be sure, you need to, for example, if you know that you can tolerate 60 sets per week. I'm just making this up, okay? Just let's say 60 sets per week. If you decide to allocate 30 of those sets, let's say 20 of those sets for chest, 20 of those sets for triceps, per week, that leaves you only 20 sets for the rest of the body. So whether you're spreading these 60 sets across evenly or deciding to use more of that available resources on two muscles, but you need to decrease how much you invest on other muscles. Otherwise, the systemic stress is going to be too high. Now, let's get back to your question. So surcompensation doesn't occur. So if you're training a muscle 3 days a week in your specialization, protein synthesis will stop being elevated after that 36 hours after your last workout for that muscle. So there's no surcompensation going on those muscles for the next 2 weeks. Okay, what can happen is those muscles might feel flatter because you're constantly training them and depleting muscle glycogen there. So once you stop training them or reduce training greatly after the specialization, they might feel bigger because you will have upregulated glycogen storage in those muscles and now no longer have the volume to drain that glycogen. So for 1 or 2 weeks, you will be in surcompensation mode for glycogen, but not for protein synthesis. So it gives the illusion that you might have built more muscle in those 2 weeks, but you really have not. But it's still important to, after you've done specializing with a muscle, to go back down in volume. You don't have to stop training that muscle. It's not a deload, but you certainly need to go back down to be able to resensitize the muscle and just to be able to invest that volume elsewhere. Okay. Now, so do you need to deload? No, because if you look at this, if you do it properly, you increase volume for the 1 or 2 specialized muscle, but you reduce volume elsewhere, the overall stress, the systemic stress on your body is the same. So there's no need for deload because the training was no more stressful than normal for your whole body or organism. It was just divided differently. So no, you don't need a deload, but you certainly should reduce training volume and frequency back to normal or even a bit lower level for the muscle you specialize on for 1 or 2 weeks. How does an over 50 years old lifter maintain or improve lower body if heavy squats and deadlifts are no longer an option due to injuries? Okay, first we need to know what injuries we're talking about, and are they limiting you to do other compound-ish lower body movement? Can you do hack squats? Can you do leg presses? Can you do back extension, for example? Okay, because here, big shocker, and that's gonna rustle a few feathers. Squat and deadlift are actually pretty poor hypertrophy movement for most people. Okay, unless you're really built for that lift. Like for me, a squat is pretty good quad movement because I'm built for squatting. But a movement like a deadlift is a very, very poor hypertrophy tool because its greatest strength as an exercise is its greatest weakness as an hypertrophy movement. The greatest strength of a deadlift is that you have so many muscles working together that none of the involved muscles are actually receiving a large stimulus. It's basically divided over many, many different things. Furthermore, besides the traps, and it's just an isometric hold, there's not a single muscle in a traditional deadlift that is being lengthened under load. Okay, the most significant stimulus for muscles is being under tension, so putting tension on those muscle fibers while they are lengthening. So it's most lengthened position, then shortening from that lengthened position. The more you can stretch or lengthen a muscle fiber before contracting it, the more effective it is for hypertrophy. Okay, and when you look at for a deadlift, no muscle is truly being stretched. Maybe the glutes a bit, okay? But the quads, you never go below like a 90 degrees knee angle. Sometimes it's more like 100. The upper back is static. Hamstrings are not shortened or not lengthened because you have the knee bend. Anyway, so there is no muscle being in an optimal hypertrophy stimulus. Furthermore, it's extremely draining as an exercise. So you can't go to failure, or even, I would not recommend even proximity to failure on a deadlift. Squat is a different story because it does, if you go full squat, fully stretch the quadriceps, which would make it a good movement. But again, it's only if you have the good leverage for it. I have short limbs, so short legs, long tibia, so that allows me to squat really upright with the knee traveling forward, really stretching that quad. If you have long legs, especially if you have a long femur, then when you're squatting, your hips will move back, but it's really, really hard to have that knee traveling forward, stretching the quad. So it's a poor exercise for quadriceps. A hack squat would be much better. So to answer your question, you know what? Honestly, if all you care about is building muscle, you're not missing out if you can't squat or deadlift, provided that you can hack squat machine, maybe leg press, maybe single leg, like a split squat. If you can do leg extension, if you can leg curls, I mean, you can totally build an awesome leg with that. And if you can do those movements, another option that I've used with a 63-year-old bodybuilder who came to me because he wanted to come back to competition, but he couldn't train his lower body because of knee issues. Literally, he could not do any traditional lower body exercise. So what we did was basically only use sled drags from various and prowler pushing from various positions as a hypertrophy tool. So we would walk backwards with a low position for quads. We would push the prowler with the hips high for glutes. We would push the prowler with a normal position for more overall leg development, and so on. We would walk sideways for adductors, abductors, and glutes. And because there's no eccentric, we can actually do that 3 days a week and recover pretty easily. And that actually worked really well. In fact, he won not only his class, but he won the overall against guys much younger, and his legs were actually his best body part. Okay. Now, what we did is when it comes to loaded carries, I used the formula 10 meters equal 1 rep. So, for example, if I'm training for hypertrophy, I personally like the 6 to 8 rep range for hypertrophy. So that would mean 60 to 80 meters on set drags. And it's not sprint. It needs to be walking speed, focusing on tension, focusing on contracting that muscle. The traveling speed might be even slower than your walking speed. And you want full extension, you want full contraction. You don't focus on speed at all. And you're obviously using a load that makes it hard to complete those 60 to 80 meters. You don't want to grind. You don't want to have to stop during your set. But at the end, you should not be able to do like 5 or 6 more meters. Okay. So the first option would obviously to stick more to more traditional lifting movement. If you can do them like hack squats, like leg curls, like leg presses, like single leg presses, and so on and so forth. And if that's out of the question, then you can go with the sled drag option. What natural supplements do you think accelerate or promote MTor the most? Okay, and just a quick recap. I did mention MTor briefly earlier on. MTor is an enzyme, and it potentiates, among other things, but at a muscle level, it potentiates protein synthesis. It increases protein synthesis, so that will allow you to build more muscle. So you certainly want MTor to be activated as much as possible around the workout. You don't want it to be activated for too long, though. That's the thing with MTor. If it's activated for too long, you will become desensitized to it, and it actually stops being effective. So you want a big burst of MTor around the workout and try to make it lower for the rest of the day. Now, there are some supplements, and it's well researched, that will increase mTOR activation. Amino acids are the best mechanism, specifically leucine. Leucine is by far the best product to increase mTOR. For example, a meal cannot be maximally anabolic if there's not at least 4 or 5 grams of leucine in that meal. Okay, either coming from protein sources or just leucine powder. That's also why I like to use leucine pre-workout. If you have leucine pre-workout, you will magnify the mTOR response from that session. So, for example, Surge Workout Fuel has leucine in it. For example, that would be a good product. Another amino acid that does increase mTOR significantly will be glycine. Glycine will increase mTOR almost as much as leucine. Here's the kicker though, you cannot use it pre-workout because glycine is a neurological inhibitor. It basically shuts your brain down, it calms you down. It decreases cortisol, decreases adrenaline, it increases serotonin, which calms you down. And by itself, it decreases neurological activation. So glycine is something I really like post-workout with athletes because it calms them down, it reduces the risk of burning out your adrenergic receptors, decreasing cortisol also. I also like it in the evening if you have problems sleeping, okay? So again, 5 grams of glycine post-workout or in the evening or both would help you build more muscle and recover faster. You also have carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are king when it comes to lowering cortisol and increasing mTOR. So that's why I like to use carbohydrates with leucine pre and intra workout to maximize the mTOR response from that session. Okay, and then another one is phosphatidic acid. Phosphatidic acid is also something that significantly increases mTOR. So you could use all 4 around the workout. So phosphatidic acid probably 30 minutes before the workout. Then you're going to have your leucine-rich product with carbohydrates before the workout and intra-workout, and you have glycine post-workout. That will maximize the mTOR response you get from your training session. So hopefully I wasn't too boring. Thank you for tuning in. Hopefully it's going to grow more and more and more. If you have any questions, you can either send them in my T-Nation forum. You go in the community tab. You can ask questions there. You can send them on my Instagram account. You can also send them in the comment section in this video. And I'm building a list so that I want to have like 10 questions for every, pre-prepare for every presentation. And then I can fill that in with the questions from the crowd afterwards. So hope you really enjoy that. If you have topic suggestion, don't hesitate. So guys, I'll see you next time.
If you enjoyed this information, hit that like button to let us know. Plus, if you never want to miss another T-Nation video again, hit subscribe and that little notification bell right next to it.